Hello, we will be discussing today IFS for Shame and Guilt by Martha Sweezy. It's going to be chapter 12, and the title is Common Problems from page 217 to 238. Let's take a moment and raise our hands to start the discussion. Yes, Bill?
To begin at the very beginning of chapter 11, it rapidly goes through the chapters and pieces and puts them in an order. And the quick way that it mentions all the chapters and pieces is a summary that happens so fast that it's hard to get my head around it very well. And I'm looking forward very much to hearing if anyone is able to do a better interpretation of the effect of the common problems that people experience than I can get out of the first section. I can't get much out of it at all. So thanks for listening. I'm hoping for some help in that area, in that first little bit where it describes all the different chapters.
Mark, do you have a response on
yeah, I do. Let me change my camera here. View, speaker. I guess it looks like I can't share my screen. Host only, host only. Okay. Yep.
I'll make you host, but is it okay? Do you need to share the screen? I'll make you host if you need to.
Well, it would be kind of convenient, I think, if I could share my screen right now, because I've got stuff about what Bill was just talking about.
Okay. Do you want to discuss about it a little bit? Is it some material? What is it? Is the web page or something?
Well, I can do it this way instead. It's let me
okay.
I can do it this way, I guess. Let's see. Can people see?
Now
can people see that?
You also have you can share. You can share now, Mark.
Oh, okay. I'll do the host tools. Share screen. Okay, share screen. And is it sharing my screen now? No.
No. I think it's because it's recording.
Is it sharing my screen now?
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Okay, I gotta do it this way then. Oh, there, it's under one advanced sharing options. And I've done this before teaching many times, but I guess I don't have the choice to share the screen then, apparently.
Okay. Yeah,
so
I think the computers at the university are a bit old.
What's that?
Maybe the computer at the university is a bit Outdated.
Oh, no, it's so anyway, if you can see this, I just broke it down into sentences. So we could all be looking at this very easily if I was able to share my screen, but I can't. So this is just the first paragraph of chapter 12. And so he breaks it down into time, shame, guilt, protective intentions, critics begetting rebels, the goal of therapy, dual consciousness, variations on no, psychic defenses in chapter 3, why therapy takes time, progress is a matter of willingness, not capacity in chapters 1, 3, and 4, empathy, parentification, and parents. And I made all of these bold. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's 12 different things that he lists in that first paragraph, or that Martha, she lists in that first paragraph. And then in the last sentence, she does anxiety, depression, major mental illness, forgiveness, endless grief, fear of death, and self-care. And she also revisits racism. And so in each one of those things I mentioned, she says, like shame as a verb. Chapters 1, 4, and 6, time, external time is linear and inflexible. Internal time is nonlinear and flexible. That was what we talked about as a medium in the previous chapter. And critics begetting rebels, chapters 1 and 4, the goal of therapy, self-validation, self-determination as a prerequisite for healthy relationships in chapter 2. So what Bill was saying, I thought, like, if we decide to have one extra meeting on this book, we could just take and review everything from the book, because this is her summary of so far we've looked at the following topics from the perspective of psychic multiplicity, or in other words, psychic multiplicity means we have many different parts. And so I just thought that that was brilliant, the way she gives this summary. And it made me want to, but I didn't have the time to go back and look at some of these things in each of those chapters that she mentions, because that would probably increase our understanding of the book by 20 or 30 or 40 or 50% if we spent a week just going back over these. But yeah, that's incredible, all the list of things. And it's not like I look at that and say, oh yeah, I understand. Oh yeah, I remember. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. The act of going back and reviewing that stuff would be a very good thing to do, is all I'm saying. And sorry, I didn't work it out. I was going to make a PDF so I could send you guys a URL so you could all be looking at that list. Because something important like that, I like to break it down into the different parts, because that one paragraph is just overwhelming. So anyway, thank you.
Bill, it is actually chapter 12 where it breaks down everything, not chapter 11. Is that, do you want to ask any further questions, or doesn't make any sense?
No, that was the perfect answer. I meant chapter 12. It was just I said the wrong number in my head, the wrong one come out. Yeah. And I can now, thank you so much. I can see so much more of the forest than the trees now, Mark. I appreciate that a great deal, sir.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for offering to create the PDF, Mark. Anne?
Just to follow on Bill's question, I totally agree. It was such an overwhelming paragraph. I don't remember at all what critics begetting rebels meant. Can someone just remind roughly the idea? I know we're maybe going to discuss this entirely in another week, but does anyone remember what it means to be a critic begetting rebel?
Hi, do I need to raise my hand?
Don't worry.
I know I can't find my hand.
Really, don't worry about it.
I can't find my hand. I totally relate to that because I do that. I have like really serious critics in my head, And the rebel is a wonderful part that rescues me from that haranguing critic. You know, it gives a critic the big middle finger, and it tells it, "I will show you," and it goes out and it gets into some extreme behaviors, like not doing any work and just pursuing pleasure. You know, is one example, or reading a book all day, and the critic says, "Man, there's so much work to do. Look at that out there." And I say, "Shut up, I'm doing what I want." And you have this polarization of fighting characters. That's just my vision of it. And it's not exactly what's in the book about it, but I experienced that. So I resonate totally with the rebel. I love my rebel, but it's too active. Thank you.
I remember something, I don't know where, but you know, our parts are there are different developmental stages. So our rebel tends to be a teenager, not a baby or something else, okay, or a grown-up. That's what I remember, you know, when we change developmentally.
You know, that makes total sense that it would be a teenager, because my rebel is definitely a teenager. I was such a good girl for so long that that's another reason the rebel had to come in and rescue that totally passive, obeying young girl that wasn't going to make it in the big world that way. So thank you.
Thank you. And is that okay? Are you complete?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. How old would the critic typically be in this critic rebel dynamic?
It's unique to each person, I think, but you know, it might be 13, 14, 16. It does depend on the person. But you know, it's not it's general. You know, in my understanding, you know, you can still have a rebel at a different age, but generally, when people change hormonally, they tend to become more like a rebel at the teenage years, or more needy or babyish at the really young years.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Oh, Marlene, go for it.
Yes, I'm intrigued by the anxiety that the society loves anxiety up to a point, you know, we get rewarded for being anxious, but there's an optimal level of anxiety. I kind of like that. Now, I tend to be both depressed and anxious, but I inherited my mom's nervous system. And I think that's the role of temperament in anxiety that's spoken of in the next paragraph. And it's interesting that there needs to be a certain amount, a minimal amount of anxiety to get going in life, it seems. A small jolt of anxiety is a signal, but too much anxiety is paralyzing. I really like that. And I'm kind of a pendulum. I don't find that optimal level. I'm either under energized or over energized in terms of the nervous system, the activity, the being active, fight, that kind of thing. It reminds me of stress. There's bad stress, which I usually identify all stress as bad, but then there is a word called eustress, EU stress, which means good stress. It's kind of like good anxiety. Again, these optimal levels seem not to be present in a nervous system that has experienced trauma. That's why I think these roles, oh yes, the most important one in terms of parts is experience and the effects of experience on parts figure in anxiety. And I think that's the reason along with having my mom's nervous system, because she was in World War II in Belgium, in Flanders, occupied by the Nazis. So I have that nervous system, and I never experienced what she experienced. So both the role of temperament, intergenerational trauma, and then the experience and the effects of experience on parts. So that is, I've never heard anxiety explained that way, and I just love that. Thank you, I'm done.
I've got some comments. Oh, just a couple of comments on the anxiety. So, page 217 at the bottom, it talks about anxiety, and it says at the end of the little paragraph or big paragraph, anxiety affects the whole system. Beyond temperament, anxiety signals the exile's underlying sense of worthlessness, which protectors fear. So, yes. So it looks like, she's making a kind of blank rule. Anxiety signals worthlessness. And anxiety fears the sense of worthlessness. So there must be some exiles there. And again, then after Bryce's anxious part, after that vignette, at the end of the vignette, totally right at the end, page 220 at the top of the page, the last sentence. An anxious temperament creates its own feedback loop and inflates worry into fear. So that can get really confusing here, because temperament is our nature, our biology. So if you are anxious by nature, it's your temperament, then that can create a feedback loop, and then you become fearsome. Yeah, go on. Yes.
Oh, no, from my understanding, temperament isn't necessarily biology. It's shaped by our experiences. Like an anxious temperament is often shaped by how we were parented. There's those different kinds of temperaments that we get from our parents. But I may be mistaken, but that's my understanding of it.
Yes. I'm gonna look because I looked it up. Oh yeah, Anne, you go on. Do you have something to support?
Yeah. I think it's definitely both. Like research finds that people with more sensitivity, so more reactivity in their temperament, they can flourish more, and they can be more easily traumatized as well, because their needs are more sensitive when they're developing. And I thought it was really interesting what Marlene said. It reminded me of, I don't know if people are familiar with Lisa Feldman Barrett. She's the neuroscientist who works on emotions. And she's kind of, the latest theory of emotions is this construction model, where this combination of sensations and then the meaning we're bringing to it is then creates this feedback loop of what then comes out as the feelings that we experience. And so it's this temporal thing where our meaning is interacting with our bodily experience, I guess. And so it's interesting what Marlene said, because a big thing in the reappraisal literature is like anxiety is something people as the first emotion that people study as being, oh, you can reappraise anxiety to be anticipation, and they often study in athletes how, oh, you, instead of being anxious, think that this is just a big moment and you're really anticipating something. And that's fine, but I guess there's two aspects to then maybe this question, which is, one, maybe if someone has by nature and nurture a very reactive system, it'd be very hard to hold back the anxiety loop to being too much. And then additionally, if one's memories are of such traumatic events, the meaning that you can't help but associate with this feeling might still be so strongly linked to traumatic memories that anxiety is just always still like, it's very hard not to construct towards that meaning of something really bad about to happen, versus anxiety can be safe and, oh, it's just a little bit of excitement. It might be very hard to adjust to that like healthy amount of anxiety.
Yeah. And it would have been nice, I think, to have a definition, her definition of what temperament is. When I've read discussing, okay, it's a couple of things I want to discuss. The like definition of the words. One is the beyond temperament. She makes a distinction on page 218. Beyond temperament, anxiety signals the exile's underlying sense of worthlessness. So there is a distinction for her temperament, what that means. And, with what Marlene, you said, in like legacy burdens from war, that can be passed on to even to the baby inside a mom's belly, okay? So that will affect the temperament. It's not very clear cut. And on another issue is, she came up with her own word for the parts that anticipate bad outcomes. She calls them anticipatory scouts. She calls them scouts. I've not seen that word before for naming the parts that anticipate bad outcomes. You spoke about anticipating bad outcomes, Anne, I think. So what it says, anticipatory scouts fear and plot to avoid the exile's exposure to more shaming. Somewhere again on page 218. Yeah, so that contributes to anxiety, having those anticipatory scouts. So I'm complete, and Bill?
Yes, I have 30 seconds to contribute my understanding of a metaphor in that you've got your disposition, and temperament is like the weather, and disposition is like the climate. Your disposition is like your climate, and the temperament's like the weather. And that's all I can offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I'm making a note of that. So I would like to change topic, if that's okay. Yeah. And the topic is forgiving, page 231. Let me find it. And towards the end of that paragraph, it says, okay, oh, here, I like two paragraphs, or one paragraph, but two sentences. So it says, the client's protectors don't know what we know, which is that forgiving does not mean giving up on justice, forgetting, condoning, or being more vulnerable, but they will learn. And the client self can choose to forgive without internal consensus. Wow. For me, it was like, wow. Even though I understand parts, and like a part of me can be whatever, like even with sexuality, a part can be straight, another part might not be. But when it comes to forgiving, I never thought of it like that. That a part can forgive, but other parts don't, and you can still forgive without an internal consensus. Wow. So, Anne, any thoughts on that, guys, from anyone?
Yeah, I marked that part down as well of the book. And it reminds me of our discussion on anxiety, because I think when it comes to anger at injustice, I think a little bit amount or the right amount is okay. It can be healthy. I mean, we don't want these terrible things to happen. And when we think of injustice in the world or that happened to ourselves, I think it's can be healthy to feel an anger, a type of anger that comes to the fore. It's just the same thing with anxiety. We don't want it to overtake us and be constricting our way of responding to life. And I guess when people talk about forgiveness, I often think it's so underdefined. I was listening to Gabor Mate talk about forgiveness, and he says he never focuses on forgiveness. He's just about, is the person moving forward in life without this event further constricting them? You know, is that wound still hurting the way they're approaching life? And he said that's forgiveness for him, is when someone's no longer letting this past event, you know, hinder their future flexibility in how they're responding. And I think that was a really good example because, and he was emphasizing that forgiveness isn't necessarily for the person that did the perpetrator, it's for the person that, you know, does the forgiveness, for them to feel free in their response to future life, which I think is a much clearer definition for me. There are probably other definitions. And then commenting on the previous part about anger, there was a discussion in this podcast called Psychology in Seattle, and he's a professor of psychology. He was saying that he didn't think forgiveness was necessary for that reason. He was saying as long as it's not, you know, impeding your life, it's okay to still feel some anger about something really horrible that happened to you, if it's, you know, within a functional range, right? So I just thought those were interesting perspectives, and I definitely feel very confused sometimes when people talk about forgiveness. It's like, what exactly does that mean? You know? Yeah, I'm complete.
Paul?
There's just on that, just for information, I've just watched this week, there's a free PESI course on forgiveness by Frank Anderson. It's 2 hours long, so it's there at the moment, was anyway, last week.
Brilliant. Mm. Mark?
Yeah, I guess that's page 231 there on the forgiving section. I think one of the key sentences, and the client's capital S self can choose to forgive without internal consensus. And then that's the emphasis that, well, the next sentence just says, yeah, don't dismiss your parts or deny your parts that still feel that they can't forgive and that they're angry and so on. Don't denigrate that feeling that some part has, or otherwise silenced and stuff. And then the sentence above that, when he says the client's protectors don't know what we know, which is that forgiving doesn't mean giving up on justice, doesn't mean forgetting, doesn't mean condoning or being more vulnerable. So a person that had a certain traumatic event happen to them, like rape, or, you know, being beat up for being LGBTQ, or being a victim of a group of racist thugs, you know, beating you up. That's what they're saying, is it doesn't mean forgetting. You could become one of the best activists that there ever was for the thing that happened to you, to fight for, you know, to take back the night movement here in the United States is about, you know, is activism by women's groups and their allies against rape, you know, take back the night. And there's groups against racism. And like in a way, some of the most, like Martin Luther King in the United States would be an example of somebody who had achieved incredible levels of forgiveness and understanding, but is battering down and leading the civil rights movement to fight against racism and against inequality and all that stuff. So, and I love that phrase, the client's protectors don't know what we know. and that we can be your capital S self that has the understanding that not forgiving is hurting yourself more than it's hurting the others. And I was studying the martial arts a lot, and Aikido was a martial artist that started a whole new school of martial arts. When another person is attacking and trying to harm you, they're out of control, so you try to help them to the ground. And without any aggression towards them, you try to help them towards the ground. And it's even more, it's not pacifist, because I'm not going to let you hurt me or hurt someone else. But it's almost like, is there even better way than punching somebody or, having to injure them to get them to stop from hurting yourself or hurting somebody else? And it's a view that this person is out of control. And then I think a lot of forgiveness is understanding that the person that is doing harm to you has been incredibly harmed in their past, and they're harming themselves from what they could be as a person. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that. But that was a good thing to bring up about the forgiving issues.
Yeah, and yet I think forgiveness is a very triggering topic. Can you imagine somebody telling you, try to forgive your perpetrator? Wow. And I've seen topics like that and conflicts where like, forgiving is good for you. Or even, the church may say, forgive. And it's a lovely, wonderful message. But as you said, Mark, you said something here, it's very important. Is again, what here, the clients, protectors don't know what we know, which is that forgiving doesn't mean giving up on justice, forgetting, condoning, or being more vulnerable, but they will learn. What they will learn is self knows. Not, we know.
Yeah.
Self knows. Yeah, sorry, go on, Mark.
And then one more thing, just think about the book that we're reading, Internal Family Systems Therapy for Shame and Guilt. So I know with myself, it's a revolution to try to forgive myself for the shame that is deeply embedded in me because of some of the traumas and the ways that I was raised and the legacy traumas that I've inherited. So forgiving yourself. So oftentimes the perpetuator is our inner critic, that I'm never good enough and I feel inferior to other people. And if only I can become a best-selling author and famous, then people will know. And then I will feel, oh, I'm good enough now, because people are thinking I'm special or something. And so just think of Robin Williams, the comedian Robin Williams and the actor Robin Williams. He became one of the most famous people in the world. Some people say he's one of the greatest comedians of the 20th century and a great actor. Committed suicide, So it's a deep thing to be able to forgive yourself too, from guilt and from shame and feeling inferior. Okay.
Yeah. Marlene?
Yes, thank you, Mark. What that reminds me of, the shame and the guilt, is that child raising was based on shame when I was being raised. I mean, it was in Belgium. I was being raised there. It's a Catholic country, so the whole country's Catholic. So guilt and shame are part of that. It's a cultural thing. And I remember my sister being shamed about being too old to suck her thumb anymore. And they were putting stuff on her thumb and shaming her and telling her all kinds of things. And I think the emotional effect on her had to be pervasive throughout her life, versus how important it was for her not to do that behavior anymore. And there was no insight in emotional intelligence in the 50s, maybe not in the 40s either. There was, I think it was all based, everything was based on survival and doing well and self-supporting and not going down the wrong path. So there was a lot of emphasis on discipline and shaming and obeying your elders and all that stuff. And it was a big mess. And I think the shame and the guilt, I can see it in my siblings. It was pervasive. It's never left them. This feeling of somehow inherent worthlessness rather than inherent worth. So it's a big cultural burden. It's hard to escape that. As a kid, you cannot escape it. Thank you.
And Emmy.
Yeah, my mom, I'm sure she received far more shame than I received from her, because she passed a lot of it on to me. And with her, you know, shaming quote unquote worked for her, and that, you know, it yeah, she has those underlying exiles of presumably worthlessness, etc. But she developed protectors that got her to do the things that she needed to do. And for me, because I was so sensitive, and then she shamed me more when the shaming didn't work, and then she shamed me more and more and more and more and more, and it truly and completely debilitated me. And I ended up, I didn't become officially disabled until I think I was right around 30. Yeah, I was 30 the year that I officially got disability, but I was disabled by the time I was, I mean, I was struggling massively in school by I think it was 5th grade. I was struggling I mean, because it affected me so severely, and I was so sensitive that you know, an amount of shame that would have been beneficial for her was debilitating for me.
And then our protectors shame us more. Oh my God.
Oh wow, yes, it's a loop, isn't it? And I had the same thing with parents, teachers. I think back then that's how what they thought will motivate you. Shame will motivate you. That's the best way. We've come a long way from then. Bill?
The lightning bolt that hit me while Emmy, I hope I remember the name correctly, because I'm thinking, spoke, was that it was Kubler-Ross saying that beautiful people have suffered and they become aware or more aware of other people because of their own suffering, and they've grown through it. And you can hear that so beautiful people are created through their understanding of suffering. So that came through as she was talking, that revelation, that understanding from Kubler-Ross. Thank you.
Emmy?
Yeah, I'm actually unusual in that I have yet to find an inner critic in my system. That I had an experience in January. I had an ayahuasca ceremony, and it was, while it was, I mean, the medicine wasn't like super active, but you have a period of time after a ceremony where your protectors are still a little more relaxed. And so I all of a sudden realized, now all of a sudden I had this little cheerleader, because this part was just telling me like, you're so amazing and wonderful. And I was like, oh my God, you're so cute. And so then I asked about having an inner critic, and this part was like, no, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do that to you, because I think I just had so much shame in me that my whole system was like, no, we're not gonna contribute to that. Now, that said, I definitely have parts that have I had a part that showed me how they had a window above an exile that felt shame, and every time I would do something that could cause more shame, they would open up this window so I would feel the shame from the exile to stop me. I thought that was really interesting. And also subsequently a few days, actually, I think it was just a couple days after that ceremony, that inner critic disappeared. So there's one or more parts that have now exiled, or the cheerleader disappeared. So I have one or more parts that have exiled the cheerleader because my system doesn't want me to have an inner critic, but there's a belief in there somewhere that I'm also not allowed to have an inner cheerleader, that's also dangerous.
I'm getting a sense that protectors can exile protectors. That's what I'm reminded.
Yeah, they can. You're muted, Vana.
Yeah, following on from the topic of forgiving, and I think it relates to forgiving as well. And I still find it like weird how, you know, the client self can choose to forgive without internal consensus. So we're not forgiving wholeheartedly. There's still little parts of us that are maybe hidden that don't really forgive. But it makes sense when I read the following little topic, endless grief, page 232. This was quite incredible for me. Page 232, endless grief. It says here, a popular old maxim says, time heals. But the following example illustrates that time does not so much heal bereaved parts as it layers the psyche with more parts. We are able to thrive despite losses because, in addition to the self, we have an ever-expanding pool of parts that appear in a developmental timeline throughout life. We are always multiplying. Wow. New parts keep coming up again and again. Like, you know, I've become a mother, I have a child, I have a son. Oops, my mother part was just, you know, it was born. My mother part was born. It didn't exist before, but now it's born. I have one more part. My parts are always multiplying. I have more and more and more and more. You know, the world is expanding. And, you know, if you think like that, I think, you know, in the way I perceive it, so I have a part, maybe a small part doesn't forgive, but then I'm getting more parts born in a different era. Okay, and like this, it says here, they learn from other parts what happened. They get to witness other parts' story. They haven't experienced the transgression. So, and, you know, as if, you know, new parts do not have that direct experience of transgression, they can forgive. It's easier for them to forgive. How I related now, you know, if that makes sense, how I related to forgiveness. So they can forgive. Some other parts back in the past might not all of them might be on board with that. But the new parts are more likely to be, let's be functional, let's forgive. And, you know, it's interesting, so interesting that time, it's not about, time does not heal. It's not it. What time does is we get this multiplicity. We are multiplying. So I don't know, guys, what did you think of that? Yeah, Anne?
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point about also the grief, because I know friends who still mourn so much the death of their loved ones from a very, very long time ago. And it wasn't complicated, you know, as their parent, they were very close to them. And they still feel the grief. It doesn't impede with their life, but they feel that depth of sadness. And I think, yeah, I mean, time, these parts of us that are responding in due proportion to the the horrible thing that happened, whether it was a perpetration or a loss. So the anger and mourning that are appropriate to it. I think it makes a lot of sense what you say, Vana, that there are parts that will just hold that response, because those are actually proportional responses, right? It's just then as our system grows and finds a way to function in life, as long as it's doing it in a healthy, expansive way, then it helps us function as a whole. And I guess the idea that the self forgives means that you're still able to respond from that full compassionate place that has choice, even if there are parts that can feel these quite intense feelings of either anger or grief at the same time.
Thank you. Brilliant. Amy?
Yeah, I highlighted that paragraph too, and that made a lot of sense to me, that it's, not necessarily time itself, but the layering of additional parts over things. I had an exile, I think it was sometime last year, and I don't recall now what the trailhead was that got me there, but it was something that happened in present day. And I was like, okay, connect with the protector, find out who they're protecting, get permission, go to the exile. And then this little, I don't know, 6-7-year-old me, I see the images and I start hearing the story, and I realize I remember this happening, and I haven't thought about it in probably at least 2 decades or more. It had been so long since it had even surfaced. And then I could recall back to like my own memory of it having happened. My own memory of it happening. I had what I now know was severe shame that I felt very viscerally in my body, and every time I thought about it, I felt that just real visceral shame in my body every single time for a few years. And then I guess over time it quieted, probably because I had so many more parts up and so many more protectors around, and whether they were serving this part or another part, it didn't matter. If they were effectively distracting me from any exile, it's a win, and then it was just buried so far down that I didn't even, I like lost any memory of it for years, until I meet this exile, and she tells me, and then I'm like, oh, I remember this. And it blew me away, that I had just completely forgotten about it. And it makes perfect sense that it was just the layering of part after part after part after part. I have hundreds of parts, hundreds. Yeah.
And Marlene?
Oh, go ahead if you like to.
I just say, don't we all have like hundreds of parts? The older we get, the more friends we have. Yeah, Marlene?
The layering is very interesting. I kind of visualize a wedding cake, with so many layers. So the bottom parts of the layers, the younger parts that experienced the loss, will continue to grieve, but then the later developmental experiences, those parts only remember the memory. They don't remember the exact feelings that the younger part that was traumatized remembers. And so later on, after the example of Annabelle's grandmother, towards the end of that, it says that the younger parts, they get sequestered. They use the word sequester. At the end of that conversation between Annabelle and the therapist, it says parts come online throughout our lives, and the ongoing development, so that layering sequesters loss. And that's so interesting an explanation for me, because I always wondered why I can vividly, distinctly, visually remember in great detail two particular traumas that affected me. One was at 17 and the other one it was younger. So, and I'm 69. And those things still pain me. You know, if I dwell on them, I don't dwell on them. But that's what this explains, that there's almost a polarization of parts, that it's these young parts that will not forget, that are almost protective, in that they say, see what happened, don't put yourself in that position again, don't be so vulnerable. And then the older parts, the layered parts, go, yeah, that happened, but it's not happening now. Why do you keep going there? You know, so there's some arguments there. So I love that. This, in a practical way, ongoing development sequesters loss. So it's not gone, it's just sequestered. So does it become an exile at some level, maybe? Thank you, I'm out.
Marlene, thank you so much. And I didn't pay attention to this specific word, sequesters, hides, sequesters loss, hides loss. Yes, interesting. And I love this so much. I'm going to read the whole thing. It's okay. Parts come online throughout our lives. In a practical way, ongoing development sequesters loss. Annabelle's grandmother died when she was 10, so parts who were 10 or younger felt bereft. But the parts who came online thereafter only knew her grandmother by reputation. While they witnessed younger parts grieving, some with more patience than others, they gradually asserted their interest in the present and future. And that, as Annabelle said, saved her life. And as you said, Marlene, you know, there's you might have parts that say, oh, come on, this is in the past. Let's look forward. Let's, you know, we have a better future ahead of us. And it's a thing, it's a cultural thing. Stop thinking about, you can't fix the past. Look forward. We now have this awareness that those are parts of us are still exiled, but what happens? Yeah, or possibly we exile them, possibly, yeah. We exile that loss, but we get more and more parts. Is that a better thing if you have, it's a crowded place within? I don't know. It does depend. It's an individual thing. We get more functional parts, and what happens to the trauma? Amy.
I don't think it's a bad thing to have a whole lot of parts. I think it's just, you know, I'm speaking from my own experience. It's really difficult when you have that many parts and you're having to do this process of healing of that many parts. It's a very long-term process, because it's you know, most of my parts are very easy to work with these days. Even at the beginning of my IFS work, I'm sure my practitioner would say I was one of her easier clients. You know, my parts are very trusting of me, generally speaking. They will vary from part to part. But the time that it takes, because I have so many wounds and they're held by different exiles. So it's not just me sitting with one exile for an hour a week to hear the 50 different stories she has to tell me over the course of a couple of months. Instead, it's, you know, a different exile with a different group of protectors. And it's this whole, even if I am burdened one exile every single session, I mean, I've unburdened. I'm very confident that I've unburdened over 100 exiles already. I don't know how many over 100, but I know it's hit the 3 digits. And I still got quite some ways to go. So, one thing that I'm curious about is I feel like it's not, I don't think, this is just my personal, the way I view it is, I can't imagine that it's a mistake that it is this way for me, that I have a massive amount of parts. I I suspect, strongly suspect, there's some kind of benefit that comes with it when enough of them are healed. I just don't know what that is yet. And maybe it's just that I gained such a massive amount of perspectives from so many different parts that I'm then able to relate to people in a way that I would not have if I only had 30 parts, you know. I don't know if that's, I mean, I have to continue the work and see, you know, I'll probably have a better idea on it in a year or two from now. But that's just kind of my thoughts on it based on my experience thus far.
Thank you for sharing your vulnerable story. Emmy, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Bill?
I just wanted to check first that Emmy was complete. She said she was curious about something. So if anyone else wants to say anything before I change the subject.
I'm complete. Thank you.
Thank you. On page 221, just rewinding a tiny bit, under the major heading depression at the top of the page, I'll just read this section. Deep voice, deep and resonant, Bill, and into the flow. Many clients come to therapy having learned to use diagnostic terms to describe their problems. This is particularly true for the word depression, which covers a lot of territory. Segue to having a lot of parts that people were discussing earlier. Depression is a physical as well as mental experience for most people. Noticing that when some people talk, they talk about their parts or their experience, and then they talk about their body's reactions or how it felt viscerally down their spine and into their back. So very conscious that that was evident in the room. They feel slow, weighed down and drained of energy. Either colours are muted or they don't see colour at all. I don't see colour at all, and that really hit home. No images and colours. And that makes me feel, like Dick Schwartz says, like a loser. He feels when people talk about images and leave people who are not visual inside sort of out of the conversation. It makes them feel like a loser. And he chuckles and laughs about it in a video that Vana shared to me that I haven't got the link to recently. And that's what I have to say about the subject of depression and seeing and that sort of stuff in this one little section there. It was incredibly meaningful for me what the summary of what you guys were saying about parts and groups and subparts, and Marlene said and that as well. So thank you very much for the growth you have caused in my brain in just your work thus far in this session, everyone. I really appreciate it.
I have a comment on that depression. My understanding is that depression looks different for everyone. And when somebody says I'm depressed, it might be, you may get a feeling of loss because maybe you don't see colors. And for somebody else, it might be completely like, it might be just sadness. I think that's what I'm getting reading through the vignettes. Emmy?
Yeah, for me, what I labeled depression was a lot of what's mentioned in that paragraph. It was also when, at the time, I had both undiagnosed narcolepsy and undiagnosed sleep apnea. And narcolepsy, most people think of it as sleeping too much, but it's actually secondary response to lacking deep restorative sleep at night. So I was sleep deprived both from the apnea and the narcolepsy. So I was constantly sleeping during the day in a poor attempt to make up for it. But I labeled it as depression because that's what everyone around me always said, that when you sleep too much, it must be depression. And so there were a lot of, I mean, like, again, she mentioned it in the paragraph, loneliness. That's something that often is what I think I've labeled that as depression more often than anything else, was the loneliness, because I have massive amounts of lonely exiles in my system. I mean, I know I still have more in there that I haven't helped yet. And then it was also, some things that I labeled depression were because somebody else labeled that for me. A lot of these, a lot of the people that give out these diagnoses, I've noticed now, looking back, when they give a diagnosis, a person, it's both the person themselves and the person giving the diagnosis. They're adding these names to things that are based on their own life experiences and what they're familiar with and what they expect to see. There is no black and white. This is absolutely 100% depression. That is never, like, because in my experience, it just depends on who you ask, whether it's the person diagnosing or the person experiencing. Everybody, if you really try to understand, they eventually give you different definitions, and it just, yeah, that's one thing that I love about IFS, is it makes so much more sense when you can just ask the part themselves, like, what's happening with you, instead of trying to attach a label that may or may not cover it with the blank, what's in that blanket of that label. And that everybody has a different definition for. I'm complete.
I've got a different topic. Again, I think it can relate to the definition of depression, and that is major mental illness, and page 227. Okay, right at the end of page 227, at the just before racism, the last few sentences, because she tried to interview 4 participants with major mental illness, and she wished she knew, Martha Sweezy at the time, she wished if it was now, she would have asked those questions. How do parts explain and relate to a malfunctioning brain? Wow, how powerful is that? I think we can use that kind of question with any diagnosis, even if it is depression. How do you explain and relate to your diagnosis? And we know that protective parts will make use of physical malfunctions in pursuit of their goals. But do they understand that the brain is malfunctioning? Can they produce or amplify psychosis? Are they capable of speeding the brain up or slowing it down? I suspect they are, but much remains to be explored regarding psychic multiplicity, and major mental illness. So I just wanted to share that I really appreciated that little paragraph there. And I can find many uses for those questions. Bill?
The lightning bolt you caused again, then a different lightning bolt that you said to do with depression. I've just written it down, so I'll try and find it. Now it's jumped out of my head, so relax. Can you please remind me what you said so it jumps back into my head?
Yeah,
Vana?
Martha's
Just quickly.
just the question is like, how do parts explain and relate to a malfunctioning
That was
brain?
it. That was it. The lightning bolt was you co-regulate it with your own energy, your body. You don't explain. You be there for the person, or you co-regulate with your own body, and you just express self however is appropriate. If self expresses itself. So you don't actually explain. You don't have to explain. It doesn't have to be head knowledge. It can be.
There might be a part in the system that can explain how, like,
there might be one there, but I'm saying you don't have to explain.
No.
It's unnecessary. And that was just, I'm sorry, I'll stop talking now. I'll mute myself.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's okay. No, it's fine. I think she was interviewing, trying to understand the for participants with major mental illness. So she would have wished she would have asked those questions to try to understand how people understand their system. It is because nowadays, with this kind of perception of the unitary mind, you give somebody a label, you're psychotic, and that's it. Let's medicate you. But there's so much more to it. Like, for even with major mental illness, you have a nervous system of parts that can amplify or not the symptoms.
Thank you for the wonderful, humbling insight from that was just fantastic, Vana. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Emmy?
Yeah, I was diagnosed as bipolar 2, so that's the milder version. As a teenager, really what I would say were bipolar symptoms were quite mild, and most of what they were seeing was just complex PTSD. Now, that said, the bipolar symptoms were also just complex PTSD. It was just parts and exiles. The medication I take for my narcolepsy gives me deep restorative sleep, and that stabilizes or at least it seemed to stabilize the quote unquote bipolar symptoms, which was only two things as far as I could ever find looking back or having experienced since. One was it happened for a period of time in, I think it was that was my early 30s, where every Sunday I would experience depression. It probably happened at other times in my life that I just don't recall specifically now. What I thought was depression, that actually surfaced a few months ago. And it turned out it had to be specific circumstances that would occur on a Sunday that would trigger it. And it was a lonely exile, and it came up, and it went back to my young childhood, and I, healed that, and it's been gone ever since. It hasn't occurred ever since. And so I that was, at least as far as I know, that's what contributed to the depressive side of what they called bipolar. The manic a lot of that was just my firefighters reacting to me living with the most unsafe parent. And then part of it was I had this cyclical thing that I noticed that stopped with the narcolepsy medication and has not come back since. And it was every 2 months I would go through a few days of a phase where I would overspend. And I mean, I'm sure that's just a protector that has a good reason for why they're doing what they're doing. I haven't connected with it yet because it hasn't surfaced, and I have other things that are surfacing that priorities, what's in the way is the way. Yeah, but for me, it's what I could classically put say, yes, this happened in cycles and that happened in cycles, and it's just parts. It's just protectors, and for whatever reason, stabilizing my sleep stabilized them. And so I feel like the bipolarism and the cyclical aspect of it likely is due to circadian rhythms being off. I wonder if these are just protectors that would work in a different fashion, but they become cyclical in response to our circadian rhythms being disrupted. And I strongly suspect, I will not personally, I won't say it's for sure until I've healed enough that it goes away, but I strongly suspect my narcolepsy is just my exiles reaching out to me all night, and therefore they're disrupting my sleep, and that's what's there. But yeah, I feel I have part that's telling me I'm rambling now, so I'm just gonna pause there.
I've actually worked with people with insomnia, and that's what we discovered. Protectors and exiles finding some time, quiet time, and they interrupt sleep, because during the rest of the day, for example, the person tries to get busy to stay away from exiles. So, and just so thank you, Emmy, for sharing that. Thank you. Just one addition here, because doctors tend to label and then give you the medication to solve the problem. And here again, under depression, page 221, halfway in a parenthesis, it says, we know that the risk of suicide goes up when depression lifts in response to outside interventions, such as medication and hospitalization. Wow! They hospitalize you and you're more at risk of suicide. They give you pills and you're no longer depressed, but you're suicidal. Why? Because you can't just have, this is not a one solution problem. It's not like here's the magic whatever. It's not, there's no magic. It is about understanding our own system. So it is quite frightening as well what is happening. Yeah. Marlene?
I think there are parts that are observant and know that the brain is malfunctioning, and then managers come around to manage more effectively to keep the firefighters at bay. It's kind of my experience. I see a lot of compensation behaviors for the deficits of the mental illness. And mental illness was a taboo. Nobody spoke about that in the family. It was only later on that I became aware that my mom is mentally ill, never diagnosed. She at least has war trauma, PTSD, I'm sure. She also appeared to be bipolar. She would go from one extreme to another. And so I was aware that she wasn't like a normal mom. because I'd spent time with my aunts and they were very different than mom. They were stable. And my brother was diagnosed with schizophrenia when he was a teenager. I had already moved away from home. I'm diagnosed with major depression. And yet everybody's protectors were adamant that we were a very good, very normal, very average, no, above average family. So it was a shock to realize what's underneath the top of the iceberg. But I think for me, in retrospect, I can see the dysfunction as mental illness. And there are certainly parts of me that are very aware of my neurosis, as in Karen Horney. And I'm told by significant others that I'm crazy. They use that euphemism. And so it gets reinforced.
So, is
Thank
there,
you.
so there are all parts. Is their parts and your parts and how they see parts rather than, a total label of everything. And Marlene, also, I'm interested in, medication. I understand that in many cases we do need medication working alongside parts therapy, IFS therapy, or something like that. So
I was very lucky with the medication. I happened to have a real good fit with serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And I know that other people struggle and never find a fit in the medication. So it's extremely fickle.
Yeah.
It's not one size fits all.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this. Thank you. Bill?
The thought immediately in the area is that medications help manage our temperature, is what immediately comes to me. But I'm going to go fast so that I'm more inclusive of faster people for a second. And I'm going to read something that made me cry, reduced me to absolute tears when I read this vignette from Martha's book. It's on page 233. And it's the beginning of the story, Annabelle's grandmother. And here I go quickly so that I don't cry. Annabelle, a 23-year-old cisgender lesbian, French-Dutch American, was 7 years old when her mother was first hospitalized for schizophrenia. She and her brother were left with their father, who molested Annabelle. After several months, her maternal grandmother intervened and took the children away. But when Annabelle was 10, her grandmother died. Annabelle and her brother returned to live with their father and mentally ill mother. Annabelle put a chain lock on her door and slept with a knife under her pillow. She came to therapy as a college student to manage the various after effects of this childhood. Just wow. And then it goes on to how Annabelle felt, but I'm just going to cut it right there. Thank you.
Yeah. This was a very powerful, kind of like, oh my God, story. I don't know. But Annabelle she's found IFS and working through those issues. She survived through this.
You never know other people's story until you listen.
Yeah.
I am absolutely complete and will be quiet for most of the rest of this meeting.
I think we are kind of the end now, towards the end. Mark?
Yeah, I'm gonna watch the podcast video on Annabelle's grandmother on page 233. At the very, very bottom of page 232, it suggests that we see Derek Scott's chapter, Self-Led Grieving, which is chapter 5 in the book, Innovations and Elaborations in Internal Family Systems Therapy. And I just looked at that a little while ago and posted some links to it. So I know I'm going to watch that because I guess it's 9 days until the 29th of April. And I've been grieving the loss of my border collie Tara since 9 days from now will be the 1 year anniversary. And I've noticed the past few weeks, most of April so far, it's just like it's become more intense because I'm remembering her last weeks and stuff. So check out the link there because I think that's going to be good. It looks like that YouTube video. And then I wanted to just introduce something, so I put it into the chat here. And I think it's the bottom of page 227. Some questions in search of answers. And that was page 227 was what Vana had talked about earlier, right before the racism section begins. The section on major mental illness, page 227, the second paragraph on the page. So I put those in there. How do parts explain and relate to a malfunctioning brain? And we know that predictive parts will make use of physical malfunctions in pursuit of their goals, but do they understand that the brain is malfunctioning? So I was thinking about that. For the first month of this year, I was having perfect nutrition. Not a single item went into my mouth that wasn't, that was indulgence or anything, and getting the best sleep. And I've noticed this over my life, and then getting real good exercise and stuff. So I put in a quote, I put in my own thoughts. I'll just kind of read them and talk about them. But I've got this protective part that deeply shames me and makes me feel very inferior and like, oh, these friends don't even want me to sit by them at the basketball game because I'm just such a loser. And I feel like horrible about myself at times. And so there's a protective part that's a harsh internal critic. And I'm remembering back when I was a little kid that people would just say, oh, he's so shy, and stuff. And I think part of that was early on acquiring a feeling of being inferior and ashamed of yourself. And so that internal critic is totally amplified when my nutrition is bad and my sleep is very bad. And I've been going through that since a couple weeks ago. Something happened and it just had a profound effect on me. It was just at a restaurant and somebody kind of criticized me that was waiting on me and being extremely friendly. And then just, it's like, why did you say that? So anyway, then I just indulged that whole weekend. I didn't sleep good, binged on TV and everything to escape, didn't do the things that I know make me feel better. And so my idea there is that, well, then I contrast that. The next thing I say, when I have had perfect nutrition and I was even having 30 different types of vegetables and foods every couple days because I was studying all the stuff about our microbiome and how that's connected to our brain and our happiness and our energy and everything. When I've got good sleep too, it's like that inner critic is really, it's very weak or it's like gone. And I can go to a basketball game with that same group of friends, the parents and former students I've had, and I don't feel ashamed of myself. And okay, I'll sit beside them, or if there's no seat beside them, I won't feel ashamed that I'm here by myself, sitting by myself and not right next to people. And so the feeling of shame that the inner critic unleashes upon me in daily life and around other people is very low and almost gone on a very good day. And so the brain malfunctioning doesn't mean there's some physical malfunction, but physically, if we have a great night of sleep, if we've been feeling pretty good about ourselves and following the discipline of eating good nutrition and stuff, then that affects our brain. So, and they even talk about, the fact that poor circadian rhythms and stuff like that it can have an effect on the future of your brain, like whether you're going to be more likely to suffer from Alzheimer's or dementia as you get into your 80s or 90s and stuff like that. So anyway, I think, and then of course, maybe part of feeling better about yourself is when I'm doing the things I know I need to be doing, my self-esteem is better and my inner critic isn't as harsh on me. So, but I think there's a physical effect from the sleep, from the nutrition, from the getting good exercise. So anyway, I'm complete.
Thank you for sharing, Mark. And Amy, this is good. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of look at a lot of stuff like that as there are things that can either stabilize us or destabilize us, because I noticed when I got diagnosed with narcolepsy and then I finally got it properly treated, and when I got that restorative sleep, it didn't just practically disappear my narcolepsy, but it affected many other things in my life. It didn't completely improve everything, but it had significant impact in multiple areas. And then I heard from other people in narcolepsy Facebook groups talking about, oh, the keto diet is the answer. And then in other spaces too, so not necessarily narcolepsy, but a lot of other things, people are like, oh, your exercise is the answer, and this is the answer, and that is the answer. And I started realizing there are just multiple things that can stabilize us or destabilize us. You know, our diet can either be stabilizing or destabilizing. Our sleep can be stabilizing or destabilizing. Our trauma and whether or not we're addressing that can be stabilizing or destabilizing. I mean, there's so many things that can factor in. And for some people, they only need one thing addressed entirely to stabilize them. For some of us, because we have so many things destabilizing us, we need to address multiple big areas to stabilize ourselves all around. But that's just kind of how I view that. And so, and it, you know, it varies from person to person what's going to work for them, but absolutely these things factor in, and that's just kind of like how I look at that stuff.
Yeah, that's wow. Yes, that's beautiful said. Beautifully said. Oh wow. Personally, I can find myself in a catch-22. You know, my sleep goes bad, my stress goes bad, and then everything is wow. There's no control. And then suddenly something happens, and I find balance again for a little while before something triggers the whole downward loop. Okay. Bill?
I'll just jump in for 1 second to say that hearing Mark talk, I've got visions of him with a cape and a mask, like a superhero getting his sleep and taking health like a Superman.
Yeah.
So thanks for that, Mark. That was fantastic.
Eating spinach. Like Popeye. Brilliant. So are we okay to come to a close, guys? Yeah. Still, there's plenty to discuss in this chapter. Like racism is a big one. Maybe we will catch up next time. So next time is going to be chapter 13. What's the title? Chapter 13. I'm going to try and find it. Yeah, I got it. So take a tip to avoid pitfalls. And I'm ending for today. Thank you for watching us.